I have to tell you, I am really excited to introduce our guest speaker this afternoon. We have Mischa Johns. Her talk title is Francis Drake and the Sacking of St. Augustine in 1586. Now, we had Mischa here as a speaker a couple of years ago. Some of you may have been here. She did a presentation on maps, and I didn't think, I know Mischa well, and I know she's very good, but I didn't even think she could pull it off to where she could make maps interesting, but she did. And I was totally enthralled, and I thought, well, let's see what else she has. And she had come up with this for us today. But to give you a little bit of background on Mischa, she is a Putnam County native, born in Palatka, from UF, and an MA in archaeology from the University of Sheffield. She has spent nearly a decade in Japan teaching English and then returned to Florida to work as the assistant archaeologist with the city of St. Augustine. And I also just found out in a conversation with her a couple of minutes ago, she spent 8 weeks on a dig in Stonehenge. So she has literally been around the world. Currently, she is the county archivist and special collections of the Putnam County Public Library System. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mischa Johns.
It's appearing in balance. Yeah, I can do it. All right. So hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I even threw a couple of maps into this one just to make them happy because I didn't like them. But so 200 against 2000 is the title of this one. I'm going to be talking about Drake himself and some of the archaeology that he left behind, probably. We'll get into that later. He already did a great job of introducing me, so I'm just going to say that's my better side right there. So I'm Palatka born and raised. I'm a graduate of Palatka High School, St. John's River State College from way back in the day when it was a community college, University of Florida, University of Sheffield. Didn't know this, but I recently just got my MLIS for library science and as an archivist back in May. So I didn't know that you want that to have on your thing. So I'm very proud of that. I'm currently special collections library archivist for the library system, formerly City of St. Augustine. Did over 250 excavations in downtown St. Augustine in the 6 years that I was there. We did a lot. And the whole thing with it is that St. Augustine is one of the few cities in the country that has an archaeological ordinance, meaning that if you dig downtown, you are required to do archaeology to record what you're going to destroy. I don't care if you're putting in a swimming pool or a sprinkler system. If you go down 6 inches in downtown St. Augustine, you're going to be looking at 300, 400 years ago. Now, you're welcome to hire an archaeologist to do that. A 3 to 4 week excavation process can cost you up to $60,000. However, the city of St. Augustine subsidizes it for less than 10% of your construction costs. So generally it costs under $1,000. So it's kind of nice of them. They're one of only, I think it's 5 cities in the country that has a city archaeologist on staff. And that archaeologist was Carl Halbert. That was my boss. I love him to bits. Do I have professional photographs of him? Yes, I do. Would I just honor him by posting them? No, you see him in the dirt. You can see him chucking a perfect square of dirt into that screen like a real archaeologist. My other mentor was Kathleen Deegan. You might have heard her name if you know anything about the Fountain of Youth in St. Augustine. She was a professor emeritus at the University of Florida. Absolutely amazing. And one of my childhood, I told her, I saw you digging when I was a child and I wanted to be you. And she's like, shut up, I'm not that old. So we're going to talk briefly about who Francis Drake is. I'm not going to give you his entire life story. I'm going to give you basically the rundown up to when he sacked St. Augustine, so you have an idea of what this guy was about. So he was born around 1540 in England, and he was the oldest of 12 sons of a Protestant preacher. And he signed on early in his late teens, early 20s to sail with his cousins, spent his early years crewing ships for the West African slave trade, within which he made a lot of money and basically built up his prestige as a sailor. He had the career cut short by the Spanish, who sacked his ships quite a few times whenever he got near the New World. And so because of that, he decided he hates all Spanish and he's just going to raid every ship and every holding and everything you can possibly find that has to do with them. He ran many assaults against Spain in the New World, and they made him extremely rich. So most of you are familiar with the pirates burying their treasure. You know about Captain Kidd. He was 1690. So Francis Drake actually sacked a mule train crossing the land bridge between the two oceans that Spanish ran, he got 20 tons of gold and silver, couldn't carry it all back, and he actually buried that treasure. Took the rest that he could carry to the beach, ended up burying most of that again. He was the original buried treasure pirate. And he was what we would call a pirate, although they called him a privateer because, as you may know, he was actually hired by the Queen to just make the Spanish life miserable. So he bounced back to Ireland to kill under 200 Scottish. Anybody here, Clan MacDonald? You probably killed your ancestor. I'm not sympathetic to this guy. He went off again in 1577. He was one of the first people to circumnavigate the globe, and then earned the dubious honor of being the first European person to kill natives on the southern tip of South America. Go him, I guess. He executed his co-commander during that trip for witchcraft. And he said that he was allowed to do it without a trial, even though he was a nobleman, because the Queen said he could do whatever he wanted, although nobody has any record of the Queen saying that he could do that. This guy just was, he raided Spanish towns all across the coast for the next few years and was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 1581 and given a ship called the Golden Hind. At that time, she also gave him a ridiculously expensive piece of jewelry called the Drake Jewel. This is it in a painting of the time. This is the actual thing in the Victoria and Albert Museum. It is gorgeous. So moving onward from that, he became a member of Parliament. He was the mayor of Plymouth. And then he went back in 1585 when kind of official, unofficial war broke out between Spain and England. At this point, they were kind of openly hostile to each other and were just basically smacking each other back and forth. So he set out with 25 ships and almost 2,000 men to just make the Spanish' life miserable in the New World. So it's about this time that he gets kind of a reputation. He is Francis Drake. He is Sir Francis Drake to the English, but to the Spanish, he is known as El Drake, the dragon, because he has this little penchant for burning everything down wherever he goes, which leads us to St. Augustine. So why St. Augustine? Why would you ever found St. Augustine? There is no gold here. The Spanish wanted gold, they wanted silver. There's nothing here. St. Augustine doesn't even have rocks, y'all. The best it has is coquina. So why here? This is because they were coming from the New World and they would swing around Florida and kind of their last stop for land was St. Augustine. They would refuel, rewater, and then shoot back across the ocean to Spain. So it was not a wealthy place. It was a little military outpost. They were paid just about as well as any military person is today, which we all know is not spectacular. So everyone's like, oh, Spanish gold in Florida. There was nothing in St. Augustine. The only time they ever found gold buried in Florida was when they found back in the 60s, they found a little cache of silver, like altar pieces that they think that the Spanish buried during the British raid at one time. So really not really buried gold pirates in our area. So why? Has anybody seen Borat? If you haven't, this will make no sense to you, but basically, I make a colony, he must make a colony. I make a colony, he must make a colony. I make a colony, he cannot afford to defend the colony, and what success I win. It was just this thing of how, at what point can we basically send a way to not let them have any more colonies because we're tired of them. The only reason they sacked St. Augustine is because it was there. It was not super strategic and it was not wealthy. It was just present. And he hated, them. So here's my map. Bautista Bosio. I love this man's map. They are incredible. He did so many of them. And basically his most famous maps come from Drake, and they are pictures that he drew of him sacking various cities in the New World, mostly Spanish-owned cities. And you'll see there's mermaids and harpies and giant flying things, and it's pretty hilarious in the end. But we have this fantastic map of St. Augustine. This map was drawn in 1589. Now, Drake raided in 1586. So this map was drawn 3 years after the raid. It was drawn, he was with him, but this guy wasn't, how do I explain it? He was an artist who was incredibly talented, but he wasn't necessarily like a professional cartographer. He wasn't measuring the degrees and everything. So it's not perfect. That green is Anastasia Island. That is the Lano Beach area. Just kind of orient you, north is this way. This is like Hospital River where Nombre de Dios is, the big church for the cross. And down here, that is St. Augustine proper. we're gonna zoom in on this map so you can see more stuff, but basically May 27th, 1586, Drake came sailing along and he went, "What's that? Is that Spanish? I see Spanish." And so he sent this little sneaky crew of ships up there to sneak in there, and basically they took over that little fort you see, and then they ran into town to just start smacking the poor Spanish colonists around. Now, St. Augustine itself, while I said it was a military town, it wasn't a very big one. When Menendez founded the town, he actually founded it. Do you know where Fountain of Youth Archaeological Park is? Okay, it is actually an archaeological park. That's the original founding point of St. Augustine City. They were only there for 9 months. When the Native Americans politely asked them to leave by setting fire to stuff. And a lot of politics behind that. And then they moved over to Anastasia Island somewhere. We're not quite sure where. And then they moved when they realized that they were in easy, just people would pass by and just casually lob cannons at them from the sea. So they were like, let's move back to the mainland. So that's why you have this little tiny town here on this one little high point with swamp all around it. It's a pretty miserable place to live. So zooming in on this, come on in, zoom in. This map is super cool, and we get to overlay it onto modern plat maps of the city. So if we want to make it a little bit clearer, black and white, you kind of see what's going on here. You have some guys coming in here. They are attacking town over there proper up north. So what happened was when he landed here, like I said, he took over that little fort, stayed there for a day, then went over to sack St. Augustine. Nobody was in St. Augustine. They all left. They all went into the swamp to the west of town, the top side of this picture, and just started firing at them and throwing stuff at them. Like I said, no real soldiers. When Menendez founded the city, the first thing he did, he came with, I think, 500 or 600 people. And the first thing he did was he took 300 or 400 and went straight to Fort Caroline to stomp on the French. Everybody was fighting everybody. And so a lot of their contingency was up in that area. Mostly what was left behind in St. Augustine during these days was, about 200, some soldiers, but the soldiers often did double duty. They were basically like reserves. They were people who, the baker could also be a soldier kind of thing. So they weren't about to fight. It was literally 200 against 2,000. You wouldn't fight that either, right?
When you say take that little fort, you don't mean the fort out there.
Absolutely not. This is 1586. It was a wooden building. I'll go over that a little bit more later, but yeah, the fort that we had there didn't come along for another 150 or so years. And that's probably one of the last things I have on this slide, but yeah, it was just a little tiny fort. I should just say fortification, probably. Yeah. And so when we take this and put it over a modern map of St. Augustine, we can see it lays down basically in this area. And just to kind of orient you, that right there is the plaza in the middle of the St. Augustine that has a little gazebo in it. So yeah, so this is now I'm going to go over how do I know that's where it's at. A lot of excavations. We did like 600. But so we have these few sites in the area. And I'm going to show you some stuff from some of them to let you see why we know that that is the 16th century area, the oldest part of the current city. Although, of course, Fountain of Youth is older than that. So we have this site here, and this pit that I'm outlining right here in the bottom, that big round pit, that's called a daub pit. And what they were doing was they were taking this, digging out a pit full of sand into the sand, because it was all sand, mixing in some clay and some straw, some water, and basically making kind of like a stucco. They would make a wall kind of like wicker. They were weaving these branches to make walls. Then you pack this in, and you would let it dry. And it makes a really nice in the southern, the Florida sun. It would actually harden really quickly. Now, what's really cool about this is that the site that we're going to show you at the end, the big one, that one actually had a structure that was made of daub. What happens to clay buildings when you set them on fire? They fire, they're hardened. So we have big, huge chunks of this daub that were probably packed into the walls of this building. You can even see the imprints of the straw on some of them. Of course, I could get pictures of those, but I have other pictures. But so the daub pits are cool. We know a lot of St. Augustine was actually built Watland daub style when they first built it in the downtown area. We find these daub pits all over the place. The next site, I love this one. Who's our weapons aficionados in here? Anybody know what that guy is? It says it on it. Don't look at it. It's cheating. This is an arquebus fort. And you have these guys that have these arquebus forts. And the reason they have it is because that thing over his shoulder is an arquebus. It's a 15th century gun, basically a cannon that fits on your shoulder. It weighs about 1 jillion pounds. And so they had these where they could rest the gun on it because you couldn't hold that straight. It didn't have a good aim anyway, so, you know. So another site we have, this is where we're getting into the nitty gritty of it. This is in the middle of the plaza downtown. And these are post holes. These posts are about 1.5 to 2 foot across. These are giant posts, like almost a tree sitting there. All of the posts that were in there had actually been charred, so intentionally burned so that they will stand up to be buried in the wet sand in Florida. Because if anybody's put anything on the sand in Florida, you know, wood does not last. And then next to that, this is right in front of the cathedral. We have a giant post hole. There are no photographs of them, which absolutely kills me. This was excavated back in like the early 90s. But if you see on this map, and we'll zoom in later, there's a watchtower there. Now, if you've been to St. Augustine, near the fort, there's that colonial quarter pirate museum or whatever, and there's a watchtower there. And they built that because of this watchtower, even though archaeologically we know it didn't look like this. It was like a crow's nest on a ship. It was a single post with a basket at the top. So the one that you see with the 4 corners of it is not historically accurate. How dare they? And then next to it, we have that little building down there. Don't worry, we'll zoom in a bit later. That is right where those line of big post holes were. It was probably the side of this building, either a palisade wall or the wall of this building. Now this glowing thing is Los Remedios. We know there was a church there. Today, this is the area where, if you're in the plaza in St. Augustine and you're facing the south, there's this pink building. It's an art gallery. That's the building that this is over right now. I'm not showing you any of that because the only evidence we have for it are burials, and I'm not into showing you remains, but there was a lot of bodies there. If you Google bodies found in St. Augustine, you'll find a ton of them. They're in the middle of the street, they're all over the place. So when we look at this site, if you look at the blue dots, I can kind of confidently draw a line. This also combined with Dr. Deegan's post hole survey where they dug, and I'm not joking, 2,500 post holes were dug across the downtown areas of Augustine to test out what they had in the ground. This also matches up with her findings that this would have been the original, but the 16th century original we have right now standing. So we're going to pull this back to this site. This is 22 Marine Street. This is the St. Augustine Archaeological Association. Now on the Blasio map, we're going to draw that little line. There's that downtown city we saw. There, right there is Los Remedios. That was the church. Remember, they're Spanish Catholic. The first thing they did was establish a church. When you go to St. Augustine, sometimes they have the flags out that say the first colonial platted city in the country or whatever. And that's because the Spanish had a formula. When you go to form a colony, you build a church, you build a fort, you build a watchtower, and you build a town on a grid. So this follows that perfectly. Then we have that watchtower and that building, which is probably a barracks, some kind of fortification, military structure. They have found some musket balls. They found some, what they're called gaiters, G-A-T-E-R-S. They're like the buttons that go on. They're like these little things that cover your boots and they button them together. So they found the buttons off of those. And so this is 22 Marine Street. Looking at a modern day map, north is this way. You can obviously see the fort there. It's pretty easy to pick out. And that right there, that flashing dot, that's Flagler College. So I'm just trying to get you to know where we're at here. This is the colonial walled city that we know the best. That's Cordova Street. And a lot of times when you look at St. Augustine, this is the image that you see of this walled city, but this walled city didn't exist until the 1800s, towards the end of my slides. That is the plaza downtown. And this glowing area is the 15th century, 16th century city. And our little site's right there. So, St. Augustine Art Association. Back in 1998, they decided they were going to expand and build that wing onto the building. And so, triggering that archaeological ordinance, they contacted the city, paid the fees. Carl came out with his team, all volunteers, and they excavated this site. So what they found, this is what an archaeological excavation looks like. We're on our hands and knees, and we're scraping the soil back 1/2 inch at a time. But in doing that, what we get to do, so if you imagine right now you walked outside and you threw an apple on the ground, and you left it there, the ground under that apple is going to turn darker brown with more organic stuff in it. Anything you do is going to change. If you dig a hole and put different dirt back in the hole, you change what the dirt looks like. As we excavate and peel these layers back, we can see the top of those stains. And when we see that stain, we then cut it in half, or we excavate around it. So what we're looking at in this picture, it looks like a bunch of gobbledygook, I know. Let me give you the archaeology vision. So the purple there is a shell layer. That is a layer of discarded shells that somebody threw away. Probably they ate a bunch of oysters. They ate a lot of oysters back then. These oysters are like 8 inches long. They're crazy. The clams are like the size of your fist. It's wild. We have some cow jaws in there. Butchered a cow. Underneath all of that, we have this layer of burned gobbledygook under there. Now that hole to the right, this is actually a 19th century privy, the oldie poo. And in that privy, we found all of these like cow bones and trash fill, because once your privy started to like slough in and not be good to use, you would fill it in with trash and use it as a trash pit. Burning trash was very common in those days. Not burning, burying trash was very common in those days. So I give you the pièce de la résistance. It means nothing, right? I'm going to show you a picture of what one of these looks like when they're beautiful and pristine, so you can see what you're looking at. This is not the same size, but in a beautiful world, this is what it looks like. So you see the ground up there, and you have this beautiful vertical wall that she has dug into the sand. And she's measuring it, and she's going to draw a picture of what the stratigraphy looks like. Stratigraphy just is the layering. And basically, at the end, we have the law of subposition, which means old stuff on bottom. You know, so as you go down, obviously, you get older. So looking at this is the stratigraphy that led us to believe that we're looking at evidence for Drake's raid. It's very ephemeral. You're going to laugh, but it's true. So up here, we have what we call the humic zone, the A zone, the modern zone. It's where we find such illustrious and exciting artifacts like beer pop top calves and shoelaces and cigarette butts. Beneath that, we have what's called the midden, the first midden, late 18th to early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century. This is the ground they walk on. This is just like your dirt outside. It's just, nothing's really been done with it. Beneath that, we have an 18th century midden with a well cut into it, also 18th century. And so that's very cool, I guess. Wells are fun. But beneath that, we have this trash zone. This is very common. Okay, like I said, they bury their trash. And what you would do is you would dig a hole and you would deposit trash into it. And then once it got close to the top, you would put a seal zone. So you see at the bottom, there's ash. And above that, there's a shell midden, just general shell refuse thrown in there. And then a seal zone. Now, we suspect this is possibly Native American. It's hard to tell because there weren't a lot of artifacts found in it. It's hard to date bone and shell. Especially when you're looking at stuff that's pretty close to our day and age right now. But if you haven't noticed it, on top of it is that jet black layer. And we believe that that is evidence for Drake's raid. Now, it is about 5 inches thick. And in this picture, it's about probably 2.5 feet wide. The whole deposit was probably about 6 feet long, 5-6 feet long. Although remember, because of that well, they actually chopped part of it out in the 18th century. They dug it out and chopped it away to build their well. So we lost a big part of this layer.
Sure, I'm glad I didn't ride up there today.
Well, this is what it looks like looking down on top of it. To the left, you can see the.
That's what's gonna be, I mean, that's what's there.
That's what's going on now.
All black. It's all burnt. And what you're looking at is pottery, nothing but pottery. Now, let me explain, whenever we dig a trash pit, we're digging up garbage. You throw away bones, basically, trash, that kind of stuff. You don't typically throw away a whole broken plate because you can glue that plate back together. Remember, we are a colony in the New World. There is no Walmart. You can't run down and go get a new pot if you break your cooking pot. So you would mend that back together. You would take it apart and, oh, I broke it into 1,000 pieces. I'm going to drill a hole in it and use it for fishing net weights. I'm going to chisel it into a circle and use it to play checkers with. Everything got reused. We never find big pieces of pottery at Augustine. Big stuff is 2 inches across. It is, you know. However, you can see giant chunks in this. And in fact, right here, you can actually see the rim of a vessel. It's some kind of vessel. And when we pulled it out, we actually had the ability to put it back together. This, again, extremely rare. And we were actually able to put it together into a whole 3D standing up piece. Carl, who had been working in St. Augustine for 30 years at this point, said that he had literally had this happen twice up to this point. When I was digging there, I had it happen twice in 6 years. It's very uncommon. But that's what makes this so special, is that that's not the only one we found. They found piece after piece after piece. They found more than 45 pieces of pottery, all burnt and charred. Most of them able to be put back together with more than 50%, even sometimes up to 80 and 90% of them put together. This is not normal. This is not something that you would have thrown away. Something happened here. Something burned catastrophically to the point where nobody tried to recover anything. They literally went back, pushed over whatever they could, buried it, and started again. Remember when Drake came, he spent 3 days rocking and rolling in St. Augustine doing nothing but burning stuff. That was all he did. There was no treasure. I think they actually ended up pillaging. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was basically the payment for the soldiers. They stole their paycheck. We found olive jars. I love olive jars. They are fantastic. They're the Tupperware of forever. And we were able to almost put some back together. Again, very ubiquitous pieces, but very indicative of what would have been there when they arrived. They do break, they don't stay forever. We don't find a lot of them in later Spanish stuff. In early Spanish stuff, we find a lot because they brought them on the ships with them. And this is one of my favorite pieces. This is called San Pedro Cob Art. This is, if you look at the other pieces that I showed you, everything was white with blue on it. This is clearly not. It is burnt, but it is also naturally brown. This is Native American pottery, okay? This is huge. This thing was like a foot across and like 16 inches deep. It is a big cooking vessel. We found almost all of it, and we found it in what was clearly a European household, a European building. Now, our best guess to this could be evidence of them trading with the Native Americans, because you needed to cook. And like I said, you couldn't run to Walmart if your cooking vessel broke. So they might have been buying cooking vessels from the Native Americans. We believe what we were looking at in this context was probably someone's pantry. The whole thing burned, and it just crashed down, hungry like pancakes down as the shelves and everything burned. We took it to a specialist who was actually able to fill in the patches and really stabilize it, and it's on display. It's really gorgeous. They call it cob marked because literally they took a corn cob that had been eaten and dried and they rolled it across the surface for decoration. So when you go see it, you'll actually see these little, like, looks like corn kernels embedded into it.
Where is it on this one?
It's in St. Augustine Art Association. I'll show you just a second. So the question is, how do we know how old this stuff is? This is our best way of knowing. All of these paintings have dates on them. These particular ones are from like 1610s, 1620s. And people look at it and go, look at the beautiful flowers and look at how the water reflects in the decanter and all that kind of stuff. But for me, I'm like, look at that salt glazed earthenware jug. Look at this lead glazed redware. Oh, lead. Kaolin pipes, tobacco pipes. Over here is another lead glazed earthenware jug. And then this gorgeous piece that looks like it's probably Delft, which is the Dutch pottery. We know the dates on these, and we are able to look at these and go, hey, we start seeing this during this year and we stop seeing it by this time. This is how we can date a lot of the pottery that we have. So this picture right here, this is another one. This was from the late 1500s. And I think it's Jesus in the house of Joseph and Mary gives Jesus in the center in the red back there. And everyone's going, look how cool and lively. And I'm going, look at all the pottery. Because even though this picture depicts biblical times, they're not depicting biblical pottery. They're using the pottery in their house at the time. This is the pottery that would have been on the table of the person who did this in the late 1500s. And just as a great example, this one is from the 1560s. And you'll see this gorgeous lead glazed earthenware pot. She's cooking eggs in it. It's sitting on like a brazier kind of thing directly onto the fire. And there's the pot that we found. Now, not exactly the same, but extremely similar. And they get really granular with these. They can get down to, like, oh, this one has a little loop on the side for a handle, and this one doesn't. They can really date these very specifically. So what we do is we take all the artifacts that we found in this dig, and we do what's called adventurous seriation, or I like to call it archaeologists will date any old thing. So we draw a timeline, and we put all the pottery on it. These are all the different kinds of pottery that we found at this site. And they all have crazy names. A lot of them have names depending on where they were found. And we have the date. So you can see like y'all, that top one is like, 1530s until about like 1580s. So you can kind of, you see how this reads kind of so, okay. Then what we do is we look at it and we go, hey, what happened during this time that could have, triggered this? And so we have Christopher Columbus, he failed to discover America. Yeah. Ponce de Leon points it forward and goes, hey, that's Spain. We have Pedro Menendez going out looking for his son and finds a country that had people already on it already and found St. Augustine. Francis Drake swings by to pillage on his way home. One of many wild hurricane parties, 1599. Forced labor begins on Castillo San Marcos. All these things happened along this timeline. Well, the first three you see, there's Santo Domingo and Olive Jar. You can see the black doesn't touch them. So that pottery can't belong to them because it hasn't started yet. They haven't started producing that pottery. Too late for Castillo, really. The only thing that's left is Francis Drake and some of the hurricanes. The hurricanes don't have any fires associated with them, and they were a little later, so probably it was Francis Drake. Now, as an archaeologist, I'm a very good storyteller. I can tell you anything you want to hear. I will never tell you that this is Francis Drake, absolutely. I'm telling you this is the best evidence we have. Because Francis Drake was not polite enough to sign something that said Francis Drake was here in 1586, Spain's crappy by thanks. So we're guessing. This could have been a regular house fire. On the other hand, it's catastrophic. They didn't recover anything. Nothing was sorted through. Everything laid as it had, we call it in situ, meaning it laid exactly as it had been deposited with nobody trying to shift anything around or move anything. So it's very good evidence for it. So what happened with Drake's raid? So this was the city when Drake raided it. You see the green, you see the blue, that's about where those little buildings were in the plaza. After the raid, the city actually doubled in size. And they moved the fort out. And it's now in the area that they call the colonial Spanish quarter with the trolley pull off. And then after that, they moved it even wider. You can see it's moving in a linear fashion. That's because that's the high ground on either side of swampland. So they're just going along the highlands. They started building this fort, but it wasn't until, the after 1721, they built this big fortifying wall completely around the city. They built a seawall, they did all this stuff. So the city continued to grow after Drake's raid. It was one of the only colonies. So when they say it's the oldest city, it's actually the oldest continually inhabited European city in the continental United States. There's a lot of conditions on that. But that's true. And as for the artifacts, back in 2014, the St. Augustine Art Association at 22 Marine Street built this beautiful display with wonderful talented help working on it. And they actually had artists come in. They had this beautiful display. And what's really cool, my favorite thing on this whole display, is this portrait right here of Francis Drake. It's a charcoal drawing. And the artist actually used this, which was charcoal that was found in the excavation from the dig. She took a little piece of it, like there was a lot of charcoal. She took just a little tiny piece of it, and she actually used that to draw the picture of him, which I think is incredibly cool. And then right next to it, you remember that cool stratigraphy I showed you with the midden and the well and all that stuff? Another artist, because there's a lot of artists in the art association, did this gorgeous tapestry. It is tactile, you are welcome to touch it. And it is that stratigraphy that I just showed you. And she's actually taken artifacts from the site and sewn them into the fabric. So it's a very cool display that you could actually go and see for yourself. And what happened to Francis Drake? The Battle of the Century happened. January 28, 1596, Francis Drake versus dysentery. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And so he died of dysentery off the coast of Panama in 1596. He was about 56-ish years old. And that was the end of Francis Drake. But he did a lot of bad stuff after that too. He wasn't a great guy. But anyway, that is my presentation. I talked a lot. But here. Are there any questions? I can answer or make up answers. Yeah.
Two, was any carbon dating done on the charcoal?
So carbon dating is a really cool tool, but not for modern historic. So in order to use it scientifically, you have to do this kind of percentage thing. It's 96.8% or something like that. So when we did radiocarbonate different sites. And so basically this is what they tell you. This dates to, for this particular thing, around 1670 and plus or minus 600 years. So sometime between 900 and 2200 AD. So it's,
You already knew that.
yeah. So radiocarbon dating is great for like anywhere from, I would say, once you get more than like 5,000 to 6,000 years old, it's not really old enough for it. So
Second question is, do you find that burn layer anywhere else in the city?
we did actually find a layer, and we weren't as certain about it as we were of this one. But do you know where the Jimenez Facio house is by any chance? Does anybody know that one? It's a really great museum. You should. It was an in-house. It was really, really cool. But we were digging in their front yard and they were putting in some kind of garden fixture. And we did find another layer, and it dated very similar to this. It was more daub and wood. So there were no real artifacts in it. And so it was hard to date that as specifically. Now, due to stratigraphy, we're pretty sure it dates to the late 1500s, but it's just not as neat as this one with all the pottery that we can just neatly go right there.
Thank you.
On your graphic, you had a lot of ships coming in with Drake.
Mhm.
Is that valid or was it
He
just
had
one?
25 ships and 2,000 men. He came to party. He wasn't joking around.
So how many people, how many lives were lost in this raid?
There was only one person killed, and it was one of Drake's men. Ha. So when they came ashore, like I said, the city was empty. Everybody had hid in the tree line, the swamps, and they ran across the fields into the swamplands towards the forest to get the people who were hiding there. And into shooting back, they lost one man. And actually, I don't know if it's close enough to see, or if I even have a way to do it. It was way back there. But there is, look at all the clicking I have to do. So much clicking. Maybe I should have less clicking in my PowerPoints. Clicking for days. Oh, come on, Boazio, where you at? There, on the Boazio map, you can actually see. Oh, I never do get on this, don't I? Oh, I never use it. I don't. Oh, it's okay. Yeah, it's this right here.
So that.
That is, that guy is being killed. That's the only guy that died. And it was when you could see he's falling off his horse. And that was one of Drake's men, so.
I think we've listened to her before, but I don't know.
Beginning, I believe it was Cartagena and Havana around.
Yeah,
Did he hit St. Augustine first and then went around and that's.
I think St. Augustine was one of the last ones he did in that campaign. I was erroneous in my graphic, but I wasn't gonna fix it. But he was coming from the
I
south,
don't remember
going
it.
back
He
to
did. I don't
Plymouth,
think so.
kind of rounding up his little, just bing, 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 all across the Caribbean, Spanish. So we were one of the last ones he hit.
And then, and interestingly on maps, you see the big ships that are out in the ocean, but then get on the small boats to come into. And obviously, because they're that inlet is really bad, they couldn't get the big ships in there.
That was one of the reasons they liked that inlet a lot. It was extremely hazardous for larger ships, because they could not get those ships in there.
As you can see that, I mean, nothing there, you can see across the islands and see the ships out, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's like I said, it was funny because originally they were on the islands and they were just getting shelled all the time as the English just sailed past us a few times. They were like, oh, bad idea. We've never found the second settlement actually, but we think it's somewhere near the St. Augustine Pier. We had a volunteer who used to dig for us, and he went jogging there in the morning all the time. And after a storm, he would find all this 16th century pottery washed up on shore. We know that they found it in a site where there was an artesian well, and we do know that off the end of the pier, there in the water, in the ocean, there is a visible artesian well if you dive down to it. And we know by maps, looking at these kind of maps, that Anastasia Island did not look like it does today. It was a more blobby shape. It went far more out to the ocean than it does today. Just patterns of erosion have changed it to the shape that we have it today. It used to be more square, now it's more kind of club shaped.
Probably also was, that was dredging.
That really help you.
The artesian well is near the St. Augustine Pier.
Yeah, I have some of our volunteers were divers and they said if you dive off, like not directly, like within like 100 feet or so of, I don't know exactly where, but they said when you go off the pier, you can actually see the water bubbling out of the sand.
Fascinating.
So